After 30 years of loyal service, my boss fired me without a single word of gratitude. But what he didn't know was that I was carrying the darkest secret about his hidden addiction. In this story, I'll reveal how his private addiction led to my public humiliation and how I turned that betrayal into my freedom. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Helena Martins. I'm 55 years old, and for the last 30 years, I dedicated my life to one thing: my work. I gave everything to that company: my time, my weekends, my holidays, even parts of myself I didn't know I was sacrificing. While others built families, explored the world, and chased dreams, I was there, in that office, building someone else's empire. I was loyal, disciplined, and proud. Or at least I thought I was. Because deep down, I was also desperately craving something I never fully received: recognition. For years, I tolerated subtle dismissals, ignored the coldness in meetings, and swallowed the quiet humiliations my boss lets call him. Richard was the kind of man who thrived on power but dressed it up with charm. To me, he wasn't just a superior, he was a mentor, almost a father figure. I trusted him. I respected him. I defended him when others whispered about his arrogance or hinted at things I didn't dare believe. But now, looking back, I realize how blind I was. I built my career on loyalty to a man who never saw me as anything more than a convenient tool. I need you to understand this. I wasn't just working for Richard. I was living for his approval. Every project completed, every target achieved, every crisis managed, I hoped, foolishly, that one day he'd finally look at me and say, "Helena, I'm proud of you." But that day never came. Instead, after 3 decades of service, he discarded me like I was nothing. No explanation, no farewell. Just a cold, formal letter. "Your position is no longer required." The pain wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing my identity, my purpose, my belief in loyalty itself. I felt betrayed in the deepest way. And yet, the most shocking part wasn't the firing. It was the secret I had carried silently. For years, a secret about Richard that he never suspected I knew. A secret that explained everything, you see. Behind Richard's polished image, behind the tailored suits and motivational speeches, there was something darker. A hidden addiction. A need that he couldn't control. And I had seen it accidentally at first, but then repeatedly until it was impossible to ignore. But I kept quiet out of loyalty, fear. I'm still not sure. Now, as I tell you my story, I realize how many of us live like that, staying silent about what we know. Protecting the very people who hurt us, thinking that if we're patient, if we're good enough, they'll finally treat us right. But they don't, and they won't. That's why I need you to listen closely. My story isn't just about being fired, it's about waking up, about seeing the truth for what it is, no matter how much it hurts, and about finding the courage to stop letting someone else's secret destroy your life. I was Helena Martins, the invisible employee, the loyal servant, the woman who never asked for much. But by the end of this story, I became someone else entirely. And if you've ever felt overlooked, betrayed, or trapped in silence, I promise you'll see yourself in my journey. After 30 years of dedication, after decades of waking up before the sun, staying long after the office lights had gone, out, sacrificing holidays and weekends, I was called into Richard's office. At first, I thought it was about the upcoming contract renewal I had worked so hard for. Maybe, finally, he was going to acknowledge me. Maybe this time I'd hear those words I had always longed for. "Helena, you've been invaluable." But instead, he didn't even look me in the eye. He sat behind his massive oak desk, fingers steepled, voice cold and detached. "Helena, unfortunately, we're going to have to end your cycle with us." Just like that. No explanation, no gratitude, no acknowledgement of the 3 decades I had given my life to that place. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth dry, unable to process what was happening. All I could manage to say was, "Why?" But he simply shook his head, mumbled something about restructuring, and dismissed me with a wave of his hand. Like I was an old piece of furniture they no longer had use for. In that moment, I felt an unbearable mix of humiliation and confusion. How could he do this to me? After everything I had done? But then, in the middle of that shock and pain, something inside me clicked. A memory, a secret. One I had buried for years, convincing myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't my place to say anything. But now it all made sense. Richard had a side no one else knew about. Or at least, they pretended not to know. I had discovered it by accident, years ago. When I was working late one evening and walked into his office without knocking, he hadn't seen me. And what I saw that night? It was raw, shameful, and completely out of character with the man he pretended to be. He was deep into his addiction, one that fed on secrecy and control, one that blurred the lines between power, pleasure, and destruction. I left quietly that night, never confronting him, never telling a soul. I convinced myself it wasn't my business, that I was loyal, that I was protecting him. But now, sitting across from him, hearing him tell me that I was no longer needed, I realized the truth. It wasn't about restructuring. It was about him. He was terrified, I knew. And maybe I did. Maybe I knew more than I ever wanted to admit. And as I stood up from that chair, holding back tears, forcing myself to maintain the dignity he was trying to strip from me, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my job, it was the beginning of something else. For 30 years, I had protected his secret. But now, I was the one paying the price for it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay silent anymore. For years, I had carried his secret like a heavy stone in my chest, suffocating but silent. It all started one night when I stayed late at the office, as I always did. Everyone had gone home. The halls were quiet, the city lights bleeding through the windows. I needed to drop off a file in Richard's office, so I walked in without knocking. We had that kind of professional familiarity, but what I saw stopped me cold. He was at his desk, the glow of the monitor reflecting his face, eyes locked onto something I immediately recognized but couldn't believe. Sight, dark, explicit, disturbing, content drenched in exploitation, far beyond casual indulgence. His hand trembling as he clicked through video after video. Oblivious to my presence, I froze, heart racing, not knowing whether to back away or confront him. In that instant, I realized something no one else knew about the man who led our company. With an iron fist who commanded respect, who presented himself as the model of professionalism and power, he was deeply addicted to lust, to secrecy, to the thrill of what he knew he should never be doing. I walked away silently, not saying a word. Maybe I should have spoken up, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't affecting anyone, that it wasn't hurting me, but I was wrong. That secret stayed with me, haunting every interaction we had from that day forward. Every time he praised me in meetings, every time he called me his most loyal employee, I wondered if he knew that I knew, or if he had simply convinced himself he was invincible. Over time, I noticed how he started to change. He became more irritable, paranoid, distant. There were days when he wouldn't even look me in the eyes. Meetings that used to be collaborative turned into tense, clipped exchanges. He started taking long, unexplained absences during work hours, locking his office door. Then the rumors began. Whispers in the break room about an anonymous complaint filed against someone high up. A complaint about inappropriate behavior. No one dared to say his name, but we all knew. And then, just like that, I was called into his office and fired. It didn't make sense at first. I had always been the dependable one, the fixer, the woman who solved the impossible, who kept the company afloat through recessions, mergers, and crises. But sitting in my car afterward, staring at the building I had devoted my life to, it hit me like a punch to the chest. He wasn't firing me because I wasn't good enough. He was firing me because I knew, because I was a risk, because he was terrified. I would be the one to expose him. At first, I was paralyzed with betrayal. 30 years of loyalty crushed in seconds. I wasn't even angry, just hollow. But then, something shifted. I started to think about all the other women who had quietly left the company over the years. Women with decades of experience, just like me. Women in their 40s, 50s, sometimes older. Pushed out without explanation after years of service. It didn't add up. So I made some calls, reached out to former colleagues, asked quiet questions, and the pattern emerged like a sickening mosaic, woman after woman, dismissed without warning, no real justification. Some of them had confided that they too had seen things, that they too had stumbled upon his addiction, or overheard things, or noticed patterns that no one else dared to mention. He wasn't just addicted to the content. He was addicted to control. And when someone threatened that control, he removed them silently, efficiently. That realization burned through me like fire. But I wasn't going to let it end that way. So, not for me. First time in my life, I sought legal counsel. I sat down with an attorney and told him everything what I had seen, what I suspected, how I had stayed silent for years out of loyalty, and how that loyalty had been repaid. He listened carefully, then explained my rights. More importantly, he told me that I wasn't alone. That what had happened to me and to the others was part of a much bigger, much darker pattern. With his help, I gathered everything I had. Emails, notes, subtle changes in policy documents, testimonies from former colleagues, and slowly, I realized that my silence had allowed him to continue this cycle unchecked for years, that I had been complicit in a system that protected him and punished women like me. But not anymore. I wasn't driven by revenge only, by the need for justice. For myself, for the women who had come before me, and for the ones that would come after, This wasn't just about losing a job. It was about breaking free from the grip of fear, of shame, of complicity. It was about making sure that no one else would be punished for knowing the truth. And for the first time in decades, I felt powerful, not because I had kept a secret, but because I was finally ready to confront it. The day of the hearing arrived, and thinking about all those years I gave to that company, to him, my hands trembled as I dressed in the most neutral outfit I could find. But my heart was a storm. Walking into that cold, sterile conference room, I saw him sitting there, Richard, the man I had once admired, respected even. Defended in board meetings when others criticized his methods. He sat there with that same arrogant posture, arms crossed, chin lifted slightly, as if none of this could touch him, as if he was still invincible. But I knew better now. I took my seat beside my attorney, the thick folder of documents resting between us like a weapon I had never wanted to wield, but knew I must. The investigator began with formalities, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then my attorney opened the folder and began laying out the evidence, methodically, carefully, piece by damning piece. First, the digital access logs, undeniable proof that Richard had accessed explicit content on company devices. During work hours, often while alone in his locked office, then, the financial records company funds quietly diverted to pay for premium memberships on those same illicit sites, hidden under vague expense codes he thought no one would ever question. And finally, the testimonies, 3 former colleagues who, once I had the courage to reach out, agreed to submit their statements, detailing their own experiences, the things they'd seen, the chilling similarities in how they'd been dismissed because after getting too close to the truth with every document presented, I watched Richard's confidence erode like a sandcastle in a rising tide. He leaned forward, tried to interrupt, to dismiss the findings, waving them off with phrases like ridiculous and pure conjecture. But the evidence was irrefutable. The investigator calmly asked, "Mr. Harrison, do you deny these are your access records?" For the first time in my life, I saw him speechless. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked around the room as if searching for some kind of escape, but there wasn't one. And then it was my turn. The investigator invited me. To make a statement, I stood up, my legs steady despite the weight of everything, and looked directly at Richard, straight into the eyes of the man who had held my career, my livelihood, my loyalty in his hands. "You fired me because you were afraid of me. Afraid I knew the truth. But here's the thing. I do know the truth. And now, so does everyone else." He flinched. I took a breath, leaned forward slightly, and said the words that had been sitting on my tongue since the day he handed me that termination letter. "You demoted me to silence me, but you didn't realize that by pushing me out, you set me free. You fired me out of fear, but I walk away from this free. You'll never be free from what you've done." For a moment, there was complete silence in the room. Then the investigator looked back at Richard and said, "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending further investigation." It was surreal watching him gather his things and hurried. Clumsy movements, the same hands that had once signed my performance awards, now trembling as he shoved papers into his briefcase. He didn't even look at me as he left the room, but I watched him go, feeling the weight I'd carried for so long finally lift from my shoulders. He had always presented himself as untouchable, the untarnished leader, the man above reproach. But beneath that facade was someone consumed by his own secret. A man so controlled by his hidden addiction that he was willing to destroy anyone who came too close to seeing it. And now everyone had seen it. His name would be tied to that investigation forever. His reputation, carefully built over decades, dismantled in the span of a single hearing. I felt no joy in his downfall, only a profound, liberating relief, because, for the first time in over 30 years, I no longer had to live in the shadow of his secrets. I had chosen integrity over fear, truth over complicity, and I knew deep in my bones that I had done the right thing, not just for me, but for every woman he had pushed out, silenced, discarded. As I left the building that day, the same building where I had spent most of my adult life, I walked out not as someone who had been fired, but as someone who had finally claimed her freedom. Leaving that chapter behind wasn't easy. After the hearing, after the official letters, and legal formalities, I received a settlement of financial compensation for the years I had given, for the injustice I had suffered. But no amount of money could erase the ache of betrayal or the scars left by decades of silence for a while. I didn't know who I was outside of that office. 30 years. I had built my life around my career, sacrificing weekends, family, gatherings, even my own health at times, just to prove I was worthy. But now, I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. With the support of my lawyer and a few close friends, I made the conscious decision to step away from the corporate world entirely. The very idea of returning to that environment felt suffocating. I needed air. I needed space. So I started therapy, something I should have done years ago, week after week. Sitting in that quiet room, I began unpacking all the weight I'd carried in silence, the subtle humiliations, the moments I brushed off my instincts, the loyalty I misplaced. It was painful, but it was also healing for the first time. I gave myself permission to feel the anger, the sadness, and then the hope. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life, not as an employee or a cog in someone else's machine, but as a woman reclaiming her dignity, her voice. I joined a local support group for women who had experienced workplace injustice. And then, something unexpected happened. I began volunteering there, sharing my story, listening to theirs, helping them navigate their fears and decisions. It gave me purpose in a way I had never felt behind that office desk. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And more than that, I was helping others do the same. Looking back, I realize now that being fired wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of a life I had long denied myself. I had spent 30 years building someone else's empire, someone else's legacy. Now, I was finally building my own. For 3 decades, I had lived in the shadows, obedient, loyal, quiet. I thought that was strength. That being indispensable, being the one who never questioned, never confronted, would somehow keep me safe. I believed loyalty meant silence, even when my instincts screamed otherwise. But I was wrong when I walked out of that office for the last time. I left behind more than just my job. I left behind the woman who thought her worth was measured by how much she could endure. The truth is, I had spent 30 years protecting a man who didn't deserve it. Mistaking fear for loyalty, confusing survival with purpose. It wasn't until I stood up for myself, until I exposed what I had long known but was too afraid to confront, that I finally understood what real strength is. Strength is not in enduring abuse quietly. Strength is in standing up and saying no more. That day, in the hearing room, looking him in the eyes as I told the truth. That was the moment I reclaimed my power. And you know what I realized? It's never too late to start over. I was 55 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in fear of disappointing someone, of losing my place, of being cast aside instead. I chose myself. I chose freedom over fear. And I learned that the chains we think hold us are often the ones we put on ourselves today. I no longer live by someone else's rules. I no longer confuse obedience with value. I've learned that facing the truth, even when it shatters everything you thought you knew, is the only way to find real freedom, and that there's no age, no title, no number of years invested that should ever stop you from walking away when you know it's time. I used to believe that starting over was a privilege for the young, but now I know. Starting over is a right for anyone at any time, at any age. And I'm living proof of that. And you? How much longer will you let them silence you? How many secrets have you kept, thinking it was loyalty, when deep down, it was just fear? Fear of being abandoned, fear of being rejected, fear that if you spoke your truth, everything you built would collapse. I learned the hardest way. Silence doesn't protect you, it traps you. Every time you bite your tongue, every time you swallow the injustice, every time you convince yourself it's not that bad, you're building your own cage. That's what I did for 30 years, but real freedom begins the moment you say, enough. Today, my victory wasn't about compensation or about exposing someone else's shame. My victory was standing up for myself, choosing my dignity over their approval. And your victory, it can start right now if you're holding on to something, some secret, some injustice, some quiet fear that's eating you alive. I'm telling you, talk to someone. Friend, a therapist, someone you trust. You don't have to do this alone. Your worth is not determined by who fired you, who rejected you, who made you feel small. Your worth is determined by who you choose to be when no one else is looking. So stop waiting for someone to give you permission to live freely. You already have it. You've always had it. The question is, how much longer will you keep giving your power away? Your story doesn't have to end in silence. It can begin in truth. Right now, if you've overcome something like this, or if you're still struggling, share your story in the comments. Here at Confession Stories, no one will judge you. We're a safe space, a place where your triumphs, your failures, your pain, and your new beginnings are welcome. You don't have to hide here. You don't have to pretend to be strong when you're falling apart inside. This is a community built on truth, courage, and the belief that no one should have to go through life's toughest moments alone. Feel free to hug me and keep watching this video that's playing on your screen.